So the city of Boise, Idaho has recently been struggling with a homeless problem. According to local news reports, some residents who can't afford the higher home prices or rent have decided to move outside and protest instead until something's done in regards to providing more lower income housing. A tent city encampment on the Ada County Courthouse lawn has been up near the Statehouse for months, and officials and some residents are growing tired of it. A local news station interviewed one of the protesters. Here's what she had to say about it.
An eviction in November pushed Sherry Jo Crandall from living in her house to living in her car.
I've had to get rid of a lot of my personal belongings, so I do have the space.
From that experience, Sherry Jo and a handful of others set up tents, signs, and snacks on downtown state property. They call this a demonstration, advocating for more affordable housing and more shelter capacity to meet the needs of the homeless.
There are families, single people like myself, who are affected by homelessness.
Interfaith Sanctuary announced Saturday their shelter is overflowing. Interfaith staff had to turn down 20 people seeking shelter that same night.
Is Interfaith a resource that you and the people here would lean on and use?
If they had the space and the ability to help us.
But the Boise Rescue Mission isn't overflowing like Interfaith.
There certainly isn't a shortage, and anyone who would show up at the rescue mission today will be served.
Reverend Bill Roscoe says the Boise Rescue Mission can shelter up to 500 people system-wide. They're currently only seeing 350. Roscoe says there's room at all 5 shelters.
Why isn't the Boise Rescue Mission maybe a resource that fills some of the gaps here if they have so much space?
Their rules and regulations are so strict.
You got to be on good behavior. You got to cooperate with staff and things like that. And some of our homeless friends just don't want to have anything to do with that, so they won't come to us.
Now this week, the Idaho governor brought other trash. Joining me now to discuss is the criminal defense attorney and anchor at Law and Crime Network, Bob Bianchi. Bob, it's great to see you. So Bob, this is an interesting case. As you know, tent cities, there can be criminal elements. It's an eyesore for the city. And as the governor mentioned, there's a lot of issues. I mean, it's unsanitary.
Yeah, Stephanie, but it's interesting. You've got a legal issue here that's going to be developing. The governor is suing with the attorney general saying, get out. But there have been previous cases where they say if it's a legitimate protest and demonstration, even if it's 24 hours, that they're allowed to do that under the protections of the First Amendment. And in the case in Idaho specifically, a court ruled that very thing and said you could be there for 24 hours, but the state still can ban you from sleeping there overnight. So it seems like a little bit of a legal contradiction that this new lawsuit is probably going to have to clean up as to whether or not this is as you can see in the pictures, a legitimate demonstration protected by the First Amendment, or if the state has a legitimate right for the public safety, health, and welfare of its individuals to remove and stop these quote-unquote demonstrations.
Yeah, and some of the reports I was looking at, the 10 cities had been parked there since January, so it's been going on for some time. And there is a law in place that basically if there are homeless people, they can't be arrested or asked to move if there's space in the shelters. And there apparently is space in some of the shelters there, so they can't really use that as their defense.
That is true, and I was listening to the intro there, and the clip of that gentleman said they may not like the rules. That is going to be a pivotal fact that is going to have to be determined by this court. If this is simply because they don't want to use those facilities trading, then there are significant First Amendment issues that are at play, and courts have previously ruled that those tents have to stay if it's a part of a legitimate protest and demonstration.
Yeah, Again, they're using the First Amendment in this case, and then also they were suggesting that there wasn't space in the homes, but now we're learning there is some space. But what ends up happening, as you pointed out, and what we heard in the video, is that oftentimes people don't want to follow the rules. There's curfew. People have to be clean, no drugs, no alcohol, and a lot of people just don't want to fuss with that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I've dealt with these facilities, and those rules are very strict because obviously they have an obligation to make sure that the residents that are there, a lot of times they're with children as well, are safe environments. So there's a legal requirement by those or those residential facilities to make sure that people are following those rules. And there's no question about the fact that you have people who are addicted and mentally ill that are homeless that can't comply with those or don't want to comply with those rules. And a lot of those people you find are on the street. They prefer not to be in those structured residential facilities. But so while the governor and the attorney general are basically saying, look, there's feces and urine and crime and drugs that are going on, and therefore we have a legitimate right to be able to remove these people. The bottom line is going to be, irrespective of whether there's room in a facility or not, are these legitimate, protected First Amendment constitutional rights of protest that are at play here? A court's going to have to make that decision as to whether or not they're going to allow the attorney general to use law enforcement to remove them.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with it. And as we know, it's not just a homeless problem or higher house prices problem in Idaho. This is going on nationwide. We've seen a lot of these tent-like cities in San Francisco and Seattle and Portland. And that's what the governor was saying. He's like, you know what, we're not these states. We do things differently here. So we'll see where this case goes. Well, Bob, we got to leave.